Alexander the Great conquered Persia in 330 BCE and thought he'd ended an empire. But 77 years later, the Parthian Empire rose in the same territory, using the same administrative systems, and Persia continued for another 700 years. Not a new empire, the same one. When Alexander died in Babylon at 32, his generals carved up his conquests. The Seleucids took Persia. Greek became the court language. Greek cities sprouted across the Iranian plateau. By every definition, the Persian Empire was dead, except it wasn't. In 247 BCE, a tribal leader named Arsaces overthrew the Seleucid governor of Parthia. Within a generation, his descendants controlled everything from the Euphrates to the Indus. And here's what they did next. They brought back the satraps. They restored the royal road. They minted coins with Persian inscriptions. They called themselves the heirs of Cyrus. The Parthian Empire lasted 470 years. When it fell in 224 CE, the Sasanian dynasty replaced it, and they did the exact same thing. Same territory, same administrative structure, same claim to be the legitimate continuation of the Achaemenid line. 3 dynasties, 2 conquests, 1,100 years of continuous Persian imperial tradition. Rome fell once and never came back. The Assyrian Empire ended in 609 BCE and stayed ended. Babylon fell to Cyrus in 539 BCE. No resurrection. But Persia kept coming back. Different rulers, different names, but the same empire underneath. So here's the question we're answering today. What made Persia unkillable when every other ancient empire died just once? 3 things made this possible. Not luck, design. First, the Achaemenid Empire at its peak in 500 BCE controlled 44% of the world's population. When it fell to Alexander, that administrative machinery, 23 satrapies, each with standardized tax collection, local autonomy, and direct reporting to the king, simply continued operating under new management. The Seleucids kept using it because nothing better existed. Second, when the Parthians revolted in 247 BCE, they didn't invent a new system. Arsaces I immediately appointed satraps using the Achaemenid model. By 141 BCE, when Mithridates I captured Babylon, Parthian coins carried the inscription Phil Hellene, lover of Greeks, on one side, and King of Kings in Persian on the other. They were deliberately positioning themselves as both Alexander's heirs and Cyrus's heirs. Third, the Sasanian Empire, which overthrew the Parthians in 224 CE, claimed direct descent from Achaemenid royalty. Their founder, Ardashir I, called himself King of Kings of Iran and non-Iran, the exact title Darius I used 750 years earlier. The Sasanians rebuilt Persepolis as a pilgrimage site. They made Zoroastrianism the state religion, a conscious revival of Achaemenid practice. 3 different dynasties, 3 different languages of administration, Old Persian, Parthian, Middle Persian. But the same empire kept recognizing itself. And that's just the beginning. Because the real question is, what specific mechanisms allowed this continuity when geography, language, and ruling families all change? Here's what you're about to learn. We're going to track the institutional DNA that passed from Achaemenids to Parthians to Sasanians, the specific administrative tools that made Persia a template rather than just a territory. You'll see how the satrap system created local stability that survived regime change, how the royal road network, 1,677 miles from Sardis to Susa, became infrastructure that outlasted its builders, how religious tolerance became a governing philosophy that made subjects prefer Persian rule. Then we're going to identify what made Persia different from every other ancient empire. We're talking about real advantages, geography, economics, institutions, the kind of structural advantages that let you rebuild when everyone else just disappears. And at the end, we're going to look at a modern parallel that'll make you rethink what empire collapse actually means. Because the lesson of Persia isn't about how to avoid falling. It's about building systems that survive your own death. Every empire has a story. Let's find the unexpected twist. For Persia, the twist is that falling wasn't failing. It was part of the cycle. But to understand that, we need to start with the foundation, the empire that created the template. In 550 BCE, Cyrus II of Persia defeated his Median overlords and founded the Achaemenid Empire. Within 30 years, he controlled everything from the Aegean Sea to the Hindu Kush. But conquest was the easy part. The innovation was what came next. Cyrus divided his empire into 23 satrapies, provinces essentially, each governed by a satrap appointed by the king. Here's what made it work. The satrap collected taxes using local systems, maintained local laws, and allowed local religions. But he reported directly to Cyrus. No feudal intermediaries, no regional independence. And Cyrus sent inspectors, called the king's eyes and ears, to audit the satraps annually. If a satrap got too independent, he disappeared. If he kept his province stable and taxes flowing, he stayed in power for decades. This wasn't decentralization, it was controlled autonomy. The satrap had power, but only as long as the center remained strong. In 539 BCE, Cyrus conquered Babylon. The Babylonians expected what conquerors usually brought, what the Assyrians had always brought: destruction, mass deportations, temples burned to the ground. Instead, Cyrus issued a declaration, now called the Cyrus Cylinder, that allowed exiled peoples to return home and rebuild their temples. The Jews returned to Jerusalem. The Babylonian priesthood kept their positions. This wasn't kindness, it was policy. A governor who respects local traditions doesn't face rebellions. Cyrus understood that empire isn't about forcing uniformity. It's about making subjects prefer your rule to the alternative. When Cyrus died in 530 BCE, his son Cambyses took Egypt, the last major power standing outside Persian control. Now the empire stretched from India to Libya. When Cambyses died in 522 BCE, Darius I seized the throne and expanded the empire to its maximum extent, from Libya to the Indus, from the Danube to the Arabian Sea. 44% of humanity lived under Persian rule. And Darius built the infrastructure to hold it together. In 500 BCE, Darius completed the Royal Road, 1,677 miles of maintained highway from Sardis in Anatolia to Susa in Persia. Mounted couriers could cover the distance in 7 days. Commercial caravans took 90 days, but they could travel safely, with rest stations every 15 miles. Darius standardized weights and measures across the empire. He introduced the daric, a gold coin of fixed weight, as imperial currency. He built Qanat irrigation systems that turned the Iranian plateau into agricultural surplus. He created a postal system that Herodotus described as unstoppable. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. That phrase ended up on the New York post office 2,000 years later. Persian infrastructure became the template for every subsequent empire in Eurasia. But here's what matters for our question. Darius didn't just build roads and coins. He built a system, a reproducible administrative model that didn't require Persian ethnicity or Zoroastrian religion to function. Any ruler who controlled the Iranian plateau could plug into this machinery and call themselves King of Kings, which is exactly what the Parthians did. In 330 BCE, Alexander burned Persepolis and executed the Achaemenid royal family. The Persian Empire, politically, ended. The Seleucids, Alexander's heirs, ruled Persia as Greek conquerors for 83 years, and then the machinery turned back on. But how does an empire resurrect itself under a completely different dynasty? How does institutional memory survive conquest and foreign rule? Stay with me, because the Parthian restoration reveals something about power that most historians miss. In 247 BCE, Arsaces I, a chieftain from the Parni tribe, killed the Seleucid satrap of Parthia and declared independence. Within 20 years, his brother Tiridates I controlled the entire Iranian plateau. Here's what they didn't do: create a new system. The Arsacid dynasty, named after Arsaces, immediately reinstated the satrap structure. They appointed governors to the same 23 provinces Darius had created 250 years earlier. They restored the royal road. They minted coins with King of Kings in Aramaic, the administrative language the Achaemenids had used. But they made one crucial adaptation. The Parthians ruled through a feudal aristocracy, 7 great families who provided troops and tax revenue in exchange for hereditary control of their satrapies. The Achaemenids had appointed satraps from the center. The Parthians made the position hereditary within noble families. Yes, decentralization, but the kind that works. And it worked for 470 years. When a Parthian king was weak, the great families kept the empire stable. When a king was strong, he could play the families against each other. The system had flexibility the Achaemenid model lacked. It could survive incompetent rulers, and it did, repeatedly. In 53 BCE, the Parthians destroyed a Roman army at Carrhae, 20,000 Roman dead, including the general Crassus. Rome never conquered Parthia. The two empires fought to a stalemate for 270 years, with the Euphrates River as the border.
And here's where we return to our opening question. How did Persia keep coming back?
After Alexander's conquest in 330 BCE, the Seleucids ruled Persia for 83 years. 3 generations. That should have been enough to erase institutional memory. Languages change, administrators retire, systems drift. But they didn't. Because the satrap system wasn't just administration, it was local power. When the Seleucids took over, they needed the existing governors to collect taxes and maintain order. Those governors knew the Achaemenid system. They trained their replacements in the Achaemenid system. By the time Arsaces revolted, the machinery was still running. The Parthians didn't restore the Persian Empire. They inherited it from the inside. This is the mechanism. Empire isn't just kings and armies. It's bureaucracy, infrastructure, and local elites who benefit from the system. As long as those elements remain, the empire can reconstitute under new management. But the Parthians made one mistake the Achaemenids hadn't. They decentralized too much. By 224 CE, the great families had become semi-independent kingdoms. The Arsacid king was first among equals, not absolute ruler. And one of those families, the Sasanians, decided they should be in charge. Ardashir I, a regional governor in Fars province, defeated the last Parthian king, Artabanus IV, in battle. He declared himself Shahan Shah, King of Kings, and founded the Sasanian Empire.
And then he did something the Parthians hadn't.
He claimed to be restoring the Achaemenid line. The Sasanians said the Parthians were usurpers, foreign Scythian tribesmen who'd stolen the throne. Ardashir claimed descent from Achaemenid royalty through a junior branch of the family. Historians don't believe this, but it didn't matter whether it was true. What mattered was the claim, because the claim meant the Sasanians positioned themselves as the legitimate continuation of Cyrus and Darius. They were reconstituting the real Persia after 550 years of interruption, and they had the infrastructure to back it up. The Sasanian Empire centralized power in a way the Parthians never had. Ardashir I eliminated the feudal families and appointed satraps directly, just like Darius. He made Zoroastrianism the state religion and persecuted other faiths, reversing Achaemenid tolerance but creating ideological unity. He rebuilt Persepolis as a ceremonial site. He commissioned rock reliefs showing him receiving the throne from the god Ahura Mazda, exactly like Darius had done at Behistun. He created a centralized bureaucracy with standardized titles and fixed salaries. By 260 CE, the Sasanian emperor Shapur I captured the Roman emperor Valerian in battle, the only time in Roman history an emperor was taken alive. Shapur commemorated it with a relief at Naksh-e-Rustam, showing Valerian kneeling before him. For 400 years, the Sasanians and Rome/Byzantium fought for control of Mesopotamia. Neither won. The border barely moved. The Sasanians proved something that most empires never figure out. You can last over 1,000 years if you're willing to let the royal family die. Keep the system, replace the dynasty. The Achaemenids, Parthians, and Sasanians were 3 completely different ruling families, different ethnicities, different languages, different religions. But they all used the same administrative template, controlled the same core territory, and claimed the same legitimacy. Persia was an institution that survived its own governments. Now here's the modern parallel, and it's closer than you think. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. 15 republics declared independence. Western analysts declared the Russian Empire dead after 400 years. But in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea. In 2022, it invaded Ukraine. And here's what Russian officials explicitly said. They were restoring historical Russian territory. The Russian Federation controls 76.9% of the territory the Soviet Union held. It maintains the same nuclear arsenal, the same permanent seat on the UN Security Council, and the same sphere of influence in Central Asia. Different government, communist to capitalist, but the same imperial structure reconstituting itself. This is the Persian pattern. China offers an even clearer example. The Qing dynasty fell in 1912. The Republic of China fractured into warlord states. The Communist Party took power in 1949. A completely different ideology, different ruling class, different government structure. But the People's Republic of China claims the exact same borders the Qing dynasty held in 1820. Tibet, Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, Manchuria. In 2013, Xi Jinping launched the Belt and Road Initiative, a modern Silk Road connecting China to Europe through Central Asia. Same trade routes, same imperial geography, different dynasty. Between 1912 and 1949, China experienced 37 years of civil war, foreign invasion, and political chaos. But the institutional template, centralized bureaucracy, Confucian administrative culture, control of the Yellow and Yangtze river valleys, survived. When the communists took power, they plugged into a 2,000-year-old system. This is what Persia teaches us. Empires don't end when dynasties fall. They end when the institutional template breaks, when the geographic core fragments, or when the cultural identity dissolves. Rome fell because the Western Empire lost control of the Mediterranean, the geographic core that made Rome possible. The Sasanians fell in 651 CE because the Arab conquest replaced Zoroastrianism with Islam, destroying the cultural foundation. But as long as the template survives, the empire can resurrect. History is an open book. Watch as we turn the pages. And the page we're on now shows imperial structures outlasting the governments that built them. The Soviet administrative apparatus still runs Russia. The Qing bureaucratic culture still runs China. The Ottoman millet system, allowing religious communities self-governance, still shapes Middle Eastern politics 100 years after the empire ended. Persia lasted 1,100 years because it built systems stronger than its rulers. And those systems are still with us. We just call them by different names now. Alexander thought he'd killed an empire. What he actually did was kill a dynasty. The empire itself, the roads, the satrapies, the tax system, the idea that this was all one place, that survived him. The Sasanian Empire finally fell in 651 CE to the Arab conquest. And that raises the next question. What does it take to actually kill an empire permanently? Not just change the dynasty, but break the template itself. We're covering that next, the specific mechanisms that end empires instead of just pausing them. If you want to understand what made the Islamic conquest different from Alexander's, that's the video to watch. It's already up.